Hey, what's up guys, welcome back to Vibe Nation, and today we're here to watch another video. Today we're here to watch the origin of
Batman fucking
No, we are not here to watch that. We are here to watch the origin story of SCP-96. Because there is another video of SCP-96 that I would like to watch. Apparently from the two parts that we watched about it, it kind of seems like it's a pretty almost near impossible SCP to destroy. So SCP Illustrated has made a video about the termination of said SCP. So, but we are here to watch one that's an origin story. It's not made by SCP Illustrated. It is made by SCP Exploration. I'm not sure whether or not they're related. They're a related channel. Hey Zyka, are they related channel or no?
No.
Okay, so they're not related channel, but though this should give us this origin of where this SCP originated from. Okay, so now that we said all that, let's go. The links will be down in the description down below, and let's go in 3, 2, 1, and what?
And boy.
And the famous SCP Containment Breach game is famous for the extremes it is capable of when looked at. As with many other SCPs, next to nothing is mentioned about the origin and history of the anomaly in the SCP Foundation. However, there are vague hints which can help us deduce not only its history, but also its exact identity. Today we will explore who exactly SCP-096 is. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to our channel with notifications on so you don't miss any of our upcoming Exploring SCP videos. And very soon we will explore the apparent indestructibleness of a very famous SCP entry. Firstly, we will try to find the exact location where SCP-096 originates from. To begin with, when exploring SCP-096's wiki, we come across an incident report of an SCP-096 escape, despite there being no obvious sighting of his face. During the breach, SCP-096 passes through many villages and cities and causes massive human casualties and damage before reaching its original victim in a town hundreds of kilometers away. So how did a person so far away with no knowledge of the anomaly trigger SCP-096? The first hint we come across is the testimony of the MTF commander, who inspected the victim's house. It is mentioned that the victim is a semi-pro mountaineer, and during a trip to a redacted mountain took a photo which happened to catch SCP-096 in the background in only 4 pixels. It is assumed that the mountaineer then triggered the Shy Guy upon randomly inspecting the photo. An expedition in an unnamed mountain range to help learn more about SCP-096's origin also took place at the exact same time the incident occurred, hinting that the anomaly's origin may be in the same mountain. In the reports, the name of the mountain consists of 9 redacted letters, narrowing down the possibilities a lot but still including the famous and highest mountain ranges, Karakoram and the Himalayas, which are attractive to pro-mountaineers. Furthermore, the aforementioned picture is also to be seen in the SCP Wiki. The terrain and general look of the picture does indeed resemble a lot the high altitudes and peaks of the highest mountains in Asia, Tibet, the Himalayas, and Karakoram. Furthermore, the tall peaks seen in the background appear very similar to Mount Everest when viewed from the north. At this point, all the evidence points that SCP-096 originates from a 9-letter high-altitude mountain range very likely to be the Himalayas, and more specifically somewhere around Mount Everest. After we have discovered a very good candidate for SCP-096's place of origin, we will try to unravel how exactly SCP-096 came to be. How did he gain his bizarre powers? And what exactly became the anomaly that we all know and fear today. But firstly, we have to take a look at an SCP that will be crucial to our theory. SCP-1529 of Euclid Object Class is a humanoid individual residing near the summit of Mount Everest in Nepal, above the 8,000-meter dead zone mark where human acclimatization is impossible. SCP-1529 resembles a standard mountaineer. SCP-1529's face is entirely obscured by the hood of its parka and what appears to be an oversized pair of black mountain goggles. At random intervals, on average 23 days, SCP-1529 can become either inactive or active, climbing to the top of the summit or sitting motionless respectively. The cause of its becoming active or inactive is unknown and shows no correlation to weather, season, or time of the year. If human climbers ascend past the 8,000 meter mark while SCP-1529 is active, it will begin making its way towards them. Once in viewing distance from the target, it will cause the traveler to make eye contact with it, which will induce a hypnotic effect on the victim, making it very difficult to break eye contact. The victim then begins to feel very warm and comfortable. An interview with the only survivor of SCP-1529 reveals what happens afterwards. The anomaly, once near the target, makes some sort of offer to the individual, but rather than saying it directly, it makes the offer telepathically with feelings and images. The offer consists of images of people sitting in hot tubs, laying by a fire, or on the beach. Warm, happy people, in short. Since every other encounter with the SCP has resulted in death, it seems like the offer, which appears incredibly hard to resist, is a quick, calm, and peaceful death. However, the survivor refused the offer and was shown images of people lying in the snow, freezing, and in pain, half dead. One specific victim was shown to the survivor, George Mallory, one of the first mountaineers to come close to climbing the summit in the year 1924, who the survivor instantly recognized. The SCP then showed how exactly Mallory died, obviously having refused the gift. The death included being tortured by the SCP. The survivor then knew his fate, refused to accept it, and punched SCP-1529 in the face, after which he fell unconscious. A rescue mission was then dispatched, which found him unconscious 2 days later, and he miraculously made a full recovery. From the interview, we know that the survivor encountered SCP-1529 only a few minutes after leaving the summit, which meant he was still at the altitude of about 8,800 meters when he fell unconscious. Staying alive while unconscious at that height for 2 days is literally impossible, and nothing close to that has ever been recorded. And since we assumed that the gift of 1529 is a fast and pleasant death, we can only assume that refusing it leads to a prolonged torture. Since dying would be a better option, maybe 1529 actually prolongs the life of its victims to make them suffer more before killing them, and only this can explain the unlikely survival of the person. Now let's go back to SCP-096. If we assume his place of origin is Mount Everest, he would have surely at some point come in contact with SCP-1529. And what if SCP-1529 is actually the source of its anomalous powers? There are very close similarities between how both SCPs function. SCP-1529 puts you in a trance when you see him, and SCP-096 attacks you if you see him. The best defense against 1529 is avoiding seeing him at all, and 096 has his face covered at all times. It seems like the only survivor of SCP-1529 acted aggressively towards it, and 096 enters rage mode when you look at his eyes. Furthermore, it is important to note that SCP-096 has a very human-like anatomy, with the exception that some of its body parts are deformed and its skin is white. With all of this evidence in mind, we conclude that SCP-096 was originally a mountaineer attempting to climb Mount Everest, when he was encountered by SCP-1529. After refusing the gift and failing to get off the mountain, he was probably approached many times by the anomaly, but managed to survive every time. Eventually, he developed a defense mechanism. Every time he saw SCP-1529, he would enter into an aggressive mode and try to attack it in order to save his life and fend the anomaly away. SCP-1529 in return prolonged the mountaineer's life likely for many years, making him suffer every minute. SCP-096 eventually turned completely mad. His body adapted to the terrain, with his hands stretching to allow for easier climbing, and his skin turning pale white from the constant exposure to the sun. Note that at this point he would have no clothes as extreme hypothermia causes victims to feel very warm and take all of their clothes away. Eventually, after years spent on the mountain fighting off SCP-1529, suffering in the extreme cold, and having been deformed and turned insane, the mountaineer becomes the anomaly we now know as SCP-096, a very shy, senseless being who would attack and annihilate everyone who dares to look at his face, a defense mechanism that was the only thing that helped him survive the extremely deadly SCP-1529. Now that we have explored how SCP-096 became who he is, we will try to narrow down his identity to one very specific and famous individual. In the year 1924, the British Empire sent a second expedition to the Himalayas in an attempt to climb the top of the world, Mount Everest. The expedition consisted of a dozen mountaineers, among them the two most famous being George Mallory and Andrew Irvine. The expedition reached an altitude of 7,000 meters, where they built Camp 4. On June 6th, Mallory and Irvine departed for Camp 5. One of the expedition members, Noel Odell, was the last to ever see them at an altitude of more than 8,000 meters. No one would ever see George Mallory and Andrew Irvine until 1999. 75 years later, when Mallory's body was discovered by a research expedition alongside many of their possessions. However, Irvine's body was nowhere to be found despite the two mountaineers being together at all times. Furthermore, from the Foundation wiki we know that Mallory was encountered by SCP-1529, so it is safe to assume that Irvine was encountered as well. However, images of him were not shown to the sole survivor of SCP-1529. A few more important things to note. Firstly, no other Everest climber would go missing at that altitude for another 40 years. Secondly, when Mallory's body was found, his skin was completely white, similar to that of SCP-096, due to the sun's effect. Lastly, in one of his letters to his family, George Mallory says about Andrew Irvine, "He could be relied on for anything except perhaps conversations," implying that Irvine is very shy. So far, we assume that SCP-096 is an Everest mountaineer whose body was never found, and who spent decades on the mountain top in order for his body to deform. Given all that and the evidence about the British expedition we explored, we conclude the most likely candidate for 096's identity is actually Mallory's partner, Andrew Irvine. Here's all the evidence we have so far. We learned from Mallory that Irvine is very shy, similar to 096's nickname, the Shy Guy. He is an Everest climber whose body was never found and who has been on the mountain the longest, more than 60 years before SCP-096 was discovered, giving him enough time for his body deformations to occur. He has most certainly encountered SCP-1529 given that he was with George Mallory. He probably denied the gift and successfully fought off SCP-1529 numerous times. Over the years, he developed a survival mechanism to attack anyone who looks at his face in order to fight off SCP-1529. Suffering from hypothermia, he stripped off all his clothes, leaving his skin exposed and thus making it turn white. He spent decades near the mountaintop losing his mind, malnourished, making him skinny just like SCP-096. Unable to die and end his suffering while his body adapted to the terrain with his hands stretching. Eventually, he was accidentally caught on a photo by an unsuspecting mountaineer and was triggered years later whilst in containment. Andrew Irvine, the now feared SCP-096, was unleashed out into the open world, almost caused an apocalypse, and all because of an expedition to climb the world's highest summit. This concludes our SCP theory on the identity of SCP-096. Do you think our theory fits into the SCP lore? If there are any other SCP's origins that you would like us to explore, don't hesitate to share them with us in the comments. Please make sure to leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and don't forget to subscribe if you enjoy this type of horror content, as next time we will explore the apparent indestructibleness of a very famous Keter SCP entry. And we have other SCP vs SCP theories planned for the future. And as always, we will see you in the next video.
I mean, what do you think? Do you think Irvin? Do you think Irvin is 096?
Well, it he could. Based on what they say, that he was shy, and that his body was the one that wasn't found. It could be that it fits with the fact that you know it could be him. And with the other SCP, that if he can shorten, or he can also cause your life to prolong, he can prolong the life. It could be that he did the same thing to Irvine, and he's just waiting. And I'm guessing Irvine's waiting for death, but he's unable to die because the other SCP is continuously prolonging it. And
Honestly, what I think is like prolonged exposure to the elements, the environment, that plus the fact that whatever energy or ability that or whatever allows the mountain, whatever. Okay, quick note, guys. Whenever me and Vibe record, it's like 3 or 4 in the fucking morning for me most of the time. So, anyway, but my guess is whatever energy is emitted to prevent death. My guess is it mutated Irvine.
Possibility. Yeah, it's a possibility that that the other SCP mutated Irvine to accommodate for not being able to die or make him somewhat immortal. Because from our last video, it's like basically almost nothing could kill this thing. So something had to have mutated his entire body for him to sustain so much damage, but yet again not feel any of it.
Honestly, like if I saw something like that, and if I bust an entire like 30 round mag into it and it's not phased, I'm just gonna fucking pull a sidearm and just pop. I'm like, nah. I'd rather shoot myself than fucking be torn to pieces by you, buddy.
It's just so like, oh my gosh, like this. I can't even. I don't even know what to say. Like, can you imagine? I can only imagine. Like, this is what that other SCP wanted, was the fact that a slow death, but in a way it's like slow eroding away at your mind till you turn insane. Because his whole defense mechanism is holding his face away from or shielding his face away from everybody else. So in reality, anybody that looks at this SCP, the SCP thinks that is that other SCP. So everybody in this SCP's eyes is that other SCP.
Oh, I have a quick another video we can do right after this. Guys, we're just pumping out SCP content.
Yeah.
Alright, well, I mean, this has been your boy Zycor and the homie Vibe Nation.
And we'll see you guys in the next video. We're out. Peace.